hip-hop's quiet storm just got loud. A new leak has hit the internet, and it points directly to Kendrick Lamar's next move. This isn't just another diss, another feature, or a hidden bar for the fans to decode. According to multiple insiders, Kendrick's strategy has shifted again, and what's coming could rewrite how power, music, and loyalty collide in the rap game. Drake's camp reportedly scrambling. Fans across X, IG, TikTok, even YouTube reactors are going wild, with some saying this is the beginning of a cultural earthquake. And the craziest part, if the leak is even half true, this isn't a response, it's a reversal. A play so bold that it could leave Drizzy with no move left to make. The game isn't just changing, it's getting dangerous. Buckle up, we're diving deep. Hashtag K.Next, hashtag Drake vs. KDOT, and it started like every other unconfirmed rumor in hip-hop. A vague tweet, a DM screenshot, a whisper in a group chat full of too much energy and too little proof. But by midday, that whisper had turned into a roar. Screenshots surfaced, names got attached. And before anyone could blink, the timeline was on fire. Kendrick Lamar's next move had leaked, and if even a fraction of it was true, the game wasn't just heating up, it was melting. At first, nobody believed it. It's not because Kendrick wasn't capable of a masterstroke. He'd been pulling off cultural checkmates for over a decade, but because the timing felt surgical. Drake had just started regaining traction after weeks of uncomfortable silence. A few carefully placed guest verses, a subtle caption hinting at control, and then this, a blueprint allegedly detailing Kendrick's upcoming collaboration strategy. Streaming ownership plays, and a silent content rollout that would bypass traditional labels entirely. The first file drop came from an anonymous handle, with less than 500 followers. But by the end of the hour, Academics had reposted it. @RapKavir liked it. Then Chart Data shared cryptic emojis. It wasn't confirmation, but it was enough. The streets don't wait for boardrooms to sign off. The culture moves on signals, and this was signal enough. According to the leak, Kendrick wasn't preparing a diss. He was preparing a realignment. It wasn't about making Drake look small. It was about making the entire structure tilt. The alleged plan outlined 3 phases: strategic collaborations with artists historically tied to Drake's biggest hits, surprise business partnerships with streaming platforms, rumored to be negotiating exclusives, a timed drop, not an album, not a mixtape, but a live cultural event built entirely around the idea of independence and control. Fans started doing what fans always do, connecting dots that may or may not even exist. Old interviews of Kendrick hinting at not fighting the wave, but moving the tide resurfaced. Industry insiders started quietly liking tweets suggesting that Drake's leverage in certain spaces might soon have competition. And just like that, the conversation shifted again. This wasn't a beef anymore, it was a takeover. Drake's camp reportedly went into emergency meetings within hours. One anonymous OVO affiliate posted a story with just 3 words: "This ain't over." The tone didn't read confident, it read cornered. Panic wasn't visible yet, but you could feel it in the spaces between the moves. Every hour that passed without a strong counter gave Kendrick's rumored plan more weight. Every silence from Drake made the leak feel more like prophecy. Meanwhile, other artists started circling. @Jid tweeted, "Blueprint season." @SZA liked a fan edit, placing her at the center of Phase 1's rumored collabs. @Tyler the Creator commented on a post with a single chest knight emoji. Whether they knew anything or not didn't matter. The illusion of momentum had become momentum itself. Even industry heavyweights who normally stay out of rap politics started throwing light onto the fire. Jimmy Iovine gave an interview saying the next decade belongs to whoever controls the pipes, not just the playlists. Timbaland went live saying, "This ain't about verses anymore. This about vision." The coded language was clear. Something big was indeed brewing. And everybody with an ounce of equity in the culture wanted to know where to stand before it hit. And here's where the panic got loud. Drake fans, normally untouchable, confident, almost untrollably smug, started showing cracks. Twitter threads went from laughing at the leaks to demanding proof to debating worst-case scenarios. Some said the leaks were fabricated by Kendrick's team as psychological warfare. Others said even if fake, the conversations they sparked would shift industry behavior enough to become real. And a small, growing faction whispered the one thing Drake's empire could not afford to hear. What if it's already too late? 'Cause here's the brutal truth about power. It doesn't move when you're ready, it moves when you're distracted. And in a season where Drake was rebuilding confidence with subtle plays, Kendrick had allegedly been building a new board. A board where being the biggest name in the room meant nothing if the room itself had been redesigned. From a cultural standpoint, the leak felt like destiny. For years, fans had debated whether Kendrick's quiet, calculated moves were simply the rhythm of an introverted genius or the careful steps of someone building towards something bigger than music. Now, with whispers of silent partnerships, chessboard collaborations, and disruptive rollout tactics, it seemed the latter theory had teeth. From a business standpoint, it was terrifying. Labels built on predictable cycles hate disruption. And here was disruption with a Pulitzer. Disruption that could tour. Disruption that already had the loyalty of critics. It's a chunk of the mainstream. And every underground head still yearning for someone to bend the rules without breaking the soul. And the timing flawless. Not attached to an anniversary, not tied to a Grammy cycle, not competing with any major festival push, was dropping in a vacuum of cultural noise, guaranteeing that when it landed, it wouldn't share the room with anything. Now, hip-hop isn't just waiting for a verse. It's waiting for a signal, a confirmation, piece of the leak to manifest into reality. A sudden guest verse on an unexpected track. A random billboard in a city nobody saw coming. A press release that doesn't look like a press release at all, because if the leaks are real, then Drake isn't in a beef anymore. He's in a hostile acquisition, and the only way out of that is to either outmove the genius or surrender the board. #KDOT, next #Drake, #VSKDOT, #Silent War, at Kendrick Lamar, at Chempo Ne Papi, at HIPHOPDX, at Rap Alert, the moment the leak reached mainstream. Blogs, the energy around hip-hop shifted like a stadium losing power mid-game. Fans who usually only engage when there's new music started talking like amateur analysts. Comment sections that normally argued over beats per minute turned into heated debates about streaming infrastructure, legal positioning, and the psychological warfare of silence. It wasn't just hype anymore. It felt like a storm map for a hurricane nobody knew how to name yet. The first ripple of panic hit at Champagne Poppy's core fan circles. Private group chats lit up with frantic messages. Bro, have you seen this blueprint? What if he really goes phase 3? Drizzy, better drop now. Posts that normally carried the confident tone of Drake runs the summer began sounding defensive. They always make up stuff about him. Don't fall for it. The shift from offense to defense was subtle but obvious to anyone paying attention. A fan base built on dominance now had to explain why dominance still existed at OVO headquarters, at least according to people who claim to have insight. Meetings stretched into the night. No leaks, no official statements, just an eerie quiet from a brand that usually thrives on omnipresence. When the loudest artist in the game goes quiet, it's either strategy or shock. And in the absence of a clear move, panic fills the vacuum. That panic is contagious. Labels call other labels. Managers text other managers. Everybody starts asking questions nobody wants to answer on record. Meanwhile, the leak itself grew legs. Fake documents, doctored screenshots, and wild theories, blended with credible threads until it became impossible to separate signal from noise. At HIPHOPDX posted a timeline of every major chess move Kendrick has made over the last decade. at Complex ran a feature titled, "Is Hip-Hop's Center of Gravity Moving?" Suddenly, what had been a maybe became a maybe soon, and that maybe soon began shaping how people talked, who they tagged, and where the money might move next. Investors who rarely care about culture started calling culture consultants. What would happen if one artist controlled not just songs but the very flow of distribution? Could an exclusive event, executed at scale, pull subscribers away from a dominant platform? Could that event trigger copycat plays that devalued traditional contracts? The questions weren't academic. They were about millions, maybe billions. A war between two rap icons had become a case study in platform risk. And in that conversation, Drake looked less like a king and more like a node. Powerful. Yes, but dependent. If the leak about Phase 2 silent partnerships held even a kernel of truth, the advantage was no longer about who could drop the biggest hit. It was about who could redirect cultural energy at the flip of a switch. Kendrick wasn't threatening charts. He was threatening gravity. Threatening gravity. Fans started tagging unrelated artists at Rihanna. You seeing this? At Travis Scott Stay Neutral King. Some turned into keyboard detectives, scouring flight logs for hints of secret meetings. Others embraced full-blown conspiracy, claiming the leak itself was a calculated misdirection, Kendrick feeding just enough chaos to make Drake move prematurely. Whether real or fake, the leak's effect became undeniable. Paralysis on one side, pressure on the other. By day 3, hashtags collided. Hashtag Scary Hours for trended alongside hashtag The King Returns. Spaces on X filled with thousands dissecting every emoji posted by anyone remotely connected to either camp. DJs debated whether playing too much Drake at clubs looked like a statement.
Streaming. Curators
quietly adjusted balance ratios. Not because of loyalty, but because of data. Kendrick's searches had spiked 340% globally in 48 hours. Engagement wasn't a fan war anymore. It was an algorithm war. At this point, the culture didn't need confirmation, it needed climax. The longer no one made a move, the more dangerous every move became. If Drake dropped a track, it would be judged not on quality, but on timing. Kendrick confirmed the leak, the mystery, his greatest weapon, would vanish. And so, silence persisted, and panic deepened. The industry hates uncertainty. Uncertainty kills cycles, freezes budgets, delays tours. A frozen cycle around two of the biggest names in music is like freezing the bloodstream of the entire genre. Inside the chaos, a strange respect emerged. Even diehard Drake fans admitted, often in low-key threads, that Kendrick had turned to absence. Into artillery, he didn't need to spit a single bar. He made the world believe a bar was coming, and belief moves markets. That's strategy beyond rap. That's corporate-level warfare executed with an artist's grace. Meanwhile, the underground celebrated. Independent artists flooded timelines with takes, like watch how fast labels pivot once they see how fragile the system is. Producers posted chess memes over beats. Writers started pitching essays with titles like, "When Silence Became the Loudest Diss in Hip-Hop." Everyone wanted a piece of a story too big to ignore, too fluid to predict, too disruptive to frame with old rules. Backchannels buzzed with rumors that Drake's next release window had been delayed. Maybe out of caution, maybe to adjust rollout angles, maybe just to wait out the storm. But in this game, waiting can look like bleeding. And bleeding, in public, can end eras. A fan base doesn't always need to be told who's winning. Feel it. Momentum has a sound, a temperature, a posture. Right now, that posture leaned west, quiet, steady, deliberate. By the end of the week, hip-hop felt like a city under curfew. Not because anyone demanded it, but because everyone sensed that any sudden move could trigger an aftershock. Playlists turned conservative. Blog headlines grew careful. Radio hosts avoided taking sides live on air. The culture's biggest conversation had become a silent standoff, and in that silence, the leak wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was reality shaping reality. #KDOT, next move. #Drake, VSK. #hiphop, on edge at Kendrick Lamar, at Champogin Poppy, at Rap KVA, at Complex while the public was busy decoding screenshots and arguing over emojis. The real movement was happening behind locked doors and encrypted calls. Multiple insiders, from engineers to mid-level label staff, began dropping small, careful hints in DM threads that were never meant to go public. The whispers didn't talk about a diss track. It talked about a sequence. It's not just a response. To Drake, a full-scale reshaping of how two giants would move on the same chessboard. At the same time, under the same pressure, according to one thread that spread like wildfire. Kendrick's team wasn't planning just a single release. They were designing what insiders described as a rolling ignition. It's the idea. Every drop would activate another, each with carefully timed visuals. Partnerships, surprise guests, and even live pop-up performances that tied together like chapters of a thriller. Nothing would leak in full, but pieces would leak on purpose, forcing every eye in the industry to stay locked on the next move instead of the last one. At Hip Hop Insider posted, "If the schedule is real, this isn't a diss, it's a demolition." And the word demolition stuck. Spaces filled with people arguing about whether this was genius or overreach. Some said Kendrick was turning hip-hop into pro wrestling storylines. Others said he was pulling the curtain back on an industry addicted to controlled chaos. Either way, the timing couldn't have been sharper. Drake had just cleared a cycle, which meant anything new from him would carry heavy expectations. Not for music alone, but for a statement. Meanwhile, OVO's circle tightened. Fewer posts, fewer appearances, less banter. A fan who normally saw crew members liking random memes noticed days of silence from the usual IG activity. That kind of vacuum doesn't go unnoticed in a culture that watches everything. And silence, when read through the lens of panic, always feels like retreat. Behind closed doors, according to several sources who spoke off-record, Drake's team considered multiple plays. Option 1, drop immediately, strike while speculation was still at fever pitch. Control the frame. Option 2, wait, gather intel, drop with precision instead of speed. Option 3, the most daring shift, the fight away from music entirely. Leaning on business leverage, streaming partnerships, brand alignments. Maybe even contractual flexes nobody outside boardrooms would understand. But every option came with a cost. And every day spent debating made the leak feel less like a leak and more like prophecy. Meanwhile, second wave of information surfaced. This one hinted that Kendrick's team had locked down strategic alliances with unexpected figures, not just rappers, but cultural architects, producers who had been quiet for years, directors known for game-changing visuals, brands with roots deep enough to pivot entire campaigns around cultural heat. The kind of moves that don't just respond to a rival. They reposition the map entirely. That's when Rap Alert tweeted, "If this all goes live at once, we're not watching beef, we're watching infrastructure move." The tweet went viral, and for once, even people outside music paid attention. Tech analysts, brand consultants, sports media, they all started asking the same question. What happens when the most influential people in music stop playing by the unspoken rules of timing and control? Drake's fans kept the defense going. He's still the bigger star. Streams don't lie. Awards matter. But the arguments sounded like trying to measure weather with a ruler. The leak wasn't about current status. It was about future terrain. And terrain determines power. By day 7, industry event calendars quietly shifted. Private listening sessions were pushed. Album release dates moved. PR teams reworked language in press kits. Nobody wanted to drop into a week that might be hijacked by a cultural earthquake. The quiet before a storm doesn't just hold sound, it holds decisions. And those decisions ripple out into revenue, scheduling, even artist health. Nobody wants to be the headline that got swallowed by a bigger one. What made the situation uniquely dangerous was that Kendrick didn't have to move yet. The leak itself had become an invisible tour, playing in every conversation without a single beat. Being heard. Drake, on the other hand, couldn't move too late. The longer he waited, the more every possible action risked looking like reaction. And in hip-hop, perception can sometimes rewrite reality faster than facts ever could. @Genius wrote a full analysis thread titled, "When Anticipation Becomes Ammunition." It broke down how Kendrick had turned the oldest weapon, mystery, into the sharpest modern sword. By removing himself from the cycle while simultaneously controlling it from a distance. He made Drake fight a ghost, not a person. How do you respond to a strategy you can't confirm? How do you attack when every attack might have been predicted months earlier? By the middle of week 2, playlists began shifting subtly toward Kendrick classics. Not new music, but old. Anthems suddenly climbing again. Humble surged. Money Trees re-entered global charts. TikTok dances started using random K-dot lines as soundtracks. Not because of a challenge, but because the name itself was trending at absurd levels. That's cultural gravity at work. The thing you talk about starts bending everything else around. Meanwhile, Drake's numbers stayed strong. They always do, but momentum felt different. The internet doesn't measure strictly by metrics anymore. It measures by mood. And the mood, even among neutral fans, was one of waiting. Waiting for confirmation. Waiting for collision. Waiting for someone to blink first. Labels that had nothing to do with either artist began issuing internal notes about timing volatility. A polite corporate way of saying, nobody drop anything major until we know what's about to detonate. And when the business pauses for the art, that's not just respect, that's fear disguised as caution. And so the setup kept tightening. Leaks spawned more leaks. Fake insiders claimed to have heard nuclear verses, only to be debunked hours later. Memes mocked the suspense while feeding it. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about rap's Cold War. And through it all, neither Kendrick nor Drake said a single direct word. Two of the loudest names in music had turned silence into spectacle. And the whole culture couldn't stop staring. Hashtag Drake VSK. DOT hashtag Next Move Matters. Hashtag Rap Chess at Kendrick Lamar. At Champagne Poppy. At HIPHOPDX. At Genius. At Genius. Hashtag Drake's Baskad. Next Move Matters. Hashtag Rap Chess at Kendrick Lamar. At Champagne Poppy. At HIPHOPDX. At Genius says one thing to control a conversation. It's another to hold it hostage. By week 3, that's exactly what was happening. Hip-hop wasn't just talking about Kendrick Lamar, it was orbiting him. Every chart move, every festival lineup update, every single cosign suddenly carried a hidden question. Is this part of the play? That kind of tension can't last forever. It has to break. And when it does, the impact is never clean. It's violent, cultural, irreversible. Late-night studio lights in both camps reportedly stayed on until sunrise for days at a time. Engineers posted cryptic selfies with captions like, "History loading," or "Y'all not ready." Trust. Fans dug into every photo, looking at plugins on monitors, trying to match waveforms, guessing tempos. Twitter Spaces turned into 24/7 war rooms, where self-proclaimed insiders debated strategy like generals in a digital trench. Meanwhile, big name producers started going quiet. Not a word, not a beat, not a session tease. When you're in a business built on hype, silence is never random. Silence is cover fire. Something was happening and nobody wanted to be the leak that cost someone the advantage. And then, almost invisibly, the business itself started bending. Radio programmers held open slots just in case. Streaming platforms delayed banner updates, waiting for the first confirmation drop. Even brands began freezing influencer rollouts. Nobody wanted to risk a multi-million-dollar campaign being drowned out by a single midnight upload from either side, @Complex tweeted. We're watching two megastars reshape release strategy in real time. The album rollout playbook is officially dead. That tweet hit 500,000 likes in 12 hours. Because it wasn't about beef anymore, it was about control. And control in the music business is the currency that buys legacy. Behind the velvet curtains, executives reportedly begged for calm. They weren't worried about diss bars. They were worried about timing volatility, the same quiet panic that had already made labels reshuffle drop dates. A single Kendrick move now had the power to derail entire fiscal quarters. Drake, equally powerful, could counterpunch in a way that spiked or crashed competing projects. This wasn't rap beef. It was economic warfare disguised as art. But every empire has a heartbeat, and fans started hearing it louder with every passing day. A mysterious snippet surfaced on a burner account. 9 seconds long, low quality, but undeniably Kendrick's voice. The line was surgical, not emotional. A calm threat disguised as a prophecy. Within an hour, the clip was everywhere. Within 3 hours, lawyers were filing takedowns. Within 6 hours, conspiracy threads claimed the leak itself was part of the plan, not a mistake, but a breadcrumb. Meanwhile, Drake's verified followers noticed subtle changes. Bio tweaks, story posts with no captions, a single chess piece emoji on black background. Minimalist, deliberate, unsettling. Could feel the internet holding its breath. Not because of fear, because of scale. Whatever was about to happen wouldn't just hit the culture. It would bend it. @AKADMIKS went live with 500,000 watching. Speculating that Kendrick's next drop isn't a diss track. It's a dismantle track, not aimed at Drake's music, but at the architecture around him. The phrase dismantle track started trending globally. Memes exploded. Analysts wrote think pieces. Even rival artists began low-key shading or praising moves they hadn't even heard yet. The entire ecosystem shifted from music to mythology, and yet still no music dropped. That's when the real panic started. Because when hype sustains itself beyond the window where a drop is expected, it mutates. It becomes speculation, feeding speculation, fear feeding fear. Labels called emergency meetings. Streaming platforms reached out with scenario modeling. And both Kendrick and Drake stood silent, two kings refusing to move until the other flinched. But silence can be a weapon too. The longer they waited, the more the conversation became less about songs and more about symbols. Kendrick wasn't just a rapper anymore. He was the shadow architect of cultural tempo. Drake wasn't just an opponent. He was the benchmark of visibility waiting to be disrupted. And in that invisible space between anticipation and impact, the entire industry froze. At Genius posted, "We're officially in uncharted territory. This isn't hip-hop history. This is cultural warfare at scale." The post broke engagement. Records other artists, some big enough to headline stadiums, openly admitted they were adjusting their own timelines. Nobody wanted to fight for oxygen during a seismic event, and then a date leaked. Not confirmed, not denied. Just a date, circled in red on a blurry photo from what looked like a venue board. The internet went nuclear. Fans started booking flights without knowing what for. Venues got calls from promoters asking if they'd been approached. Cities trended on Twitter just from being rumored drop sites. Drake's camp, according to insiders, accelerated everything. Suddenly, there were murmurs of locked sessions, rapid mixing, cleared features, legal clearances flying. At midnight, the chess game had reached the clock phase. Every second mattered. But here's the twist no one predicted. Both sides were winning. The anticipation itself had become the product. Streams of both catalogs climbed. Merch sold without context. Podcasts, reaction channels, blogs, all hitting record traffic. The fight wasn't just feeding the culture. It was monetizing it in real time. And that's the dangerous beauty of this leak cycle. It turned two rivals into co-authors of the same global event. Whether they meant to or not, Kendrick Lamar and Drake had turned hip-hop into a spectator sport of strategy, timing, and silent aggression. Every player in the game, fans, brands, platforms, even haters, became participants in a performance where no one knew the script, but everyone felt the stakes. The breaking point wasn't a bar or a beat or a diss. It was the realization that what started as music had become infrastructure. And once art evolves into system, you can't put it back in the box. You just wait for the detonation, knowing the blast won't destroy one artist. But the rules everyone else assumed were permanent. Hashtag hip-hop war. Hashtag KDOTV's DRIZZY. Hashtag next move changes everything. At Kendrick Lamar, at Champagnopoppy, at Complex, at Genius, at HIPHOPDX. This isn't just music anymore. This is history being written in real time. Every hour that passes without a single note dropping, the stakes climb higher. The speculation gets wilder, and the lines between culture, business, and war keep blurring. You've just seen how deep the rabbit hole goes. Now it's your move. What do you think happens next? Does Drake fire first, flipping the board? Or does Kendrick trigger the kind of cultural avalanche that nobody in hip-hop has ever recovered from? We're tracking every leak, every tweet, every silent move from the camps that matter. If you want to stay ahead of the blast, now's the time. Subscribe, follow, turn those notifications all the way up, because the next headline might not just break the internet. It might rewrite it. Hashtag stay locked in. Hashtag hip-hop history loading. At Kendrick Lamar, at Champagnepop, at Complex, at HIPHOPDX, at Genius.